Hey guys, it's Tyler. I haven't made a video in a little bit. I switched to a new job recently, so I've been uh, reorienting, I suppose, is the way to say about that. I've got a lot of different days off, and my weekends have been kind of all over the place because I work game days and etc. College town life. Anyway, Max sent this tweet, and oh boy, it's such a short tweet. It's a single sentence, and it's opened an entire can of worms. On one hand, I kind of want to answer the question honestly because it does seem like a legitimate question. On the other end of things, I want to tackle why I refuted the premise of the question in the first place. So let's get into that. Let's just go line by line and then I'll respond to some of the comments. No camera, you don't need to see me here. How do you handle a player who refuses to engage with the story in Dungeons and Dragons? Okay. I assume by Dungeons and Dragons he means tabletop RPGs. He's using it as a Kleenex term. If specifically Dungeons and Dragons, okay, whatever. First, this line, and I do this by mistake a lot of times too. How do you handle a player who refuses to engage with the story? Is a different question than how do you handle a player whose character or a player character who refuses to engage with the story. So these are two different questions in here depending on what he actually meant here. If he means a player, I like when players engage with the story outside of our game time, right? If I'm carpooling or just in a Discord, voice chat or, just yakking, I like talking about, how the way things could have gone and things like that. But if they're not engaging with it, it might just mean that what you had wasn't that interesting, right? I think we should not always jump to the conclusion that it's the player who's wrong, and we'll get to that down here. It may seriously mean that it's garbage. We have this idea that the customer is always wrong these days, right? Oh, you didn't like the trash garbage movement in Concord. Well, it must be the gamers that are at fault. You don't understand why critics are giving this such a high review when you play it, it barely runs, it bugs out, 20 hours into the game and you can't even complete it. Well, again, it must be you at the consumer end are at fault here. Really, we need to go back and consider you may have just made something that's not that interesting. Alternatively, that player might just be there because you're friends with them. So that's on the you literally did mean a player refuses to engage with the story. Now, I think what they actually meant, though, and what people are responding as if they meant, is how do you handle a player character who refuses to engage with the story? Well, number one, you shouldn't have a story pre written in Dungeons and Dragons. Alternatively, there's another tricky thing here, right? Like I said, this is one sentence, but there's so much wrapped into it. Because do you mean the meta plot in Dungeons and Dragons? Such as you have a player who's made a character that does not have any sort of ties to Faerun or whatever of the 8 million different universes that are in the Dungeons and Dragons setting at this point. Well, that can be an issue. That can. If you had a session zero, so that's number one, have a session zero, make sure all your players are on the same page. If you had a session zero, you should kind of know hey, we're playing in this setting. Unless your character's an amnesiac or very young or very stupid or just not that worldly, you should probably know at least, a region where the characters live most of their life or something like that. you don't have to memorize a bunch of stuff by rote, but when you're playing in a preordained setting, you should probably have at least some knowledge as to what it is, and probably should make that character's knowledge known throughout the game. It makes things feel much more alive, much more, well, role played, believe it or not. Let's say you're playing a. My Dungeons and Dragons knowledge is slipping on me. I have not played in a Dungeons and Dragons setting in a long time. Let's say you're playing in Dark Sun, right? The world of Athos, and your character is not acting in any particular way when they see a plant. Well, it could either tell you that they're maybe a druid, one of the rare druids in Athos, and they've been around, or they've lived a very strange life where they have been in one of the few oases in the desert world. Or it could tell you that the player did not read up on anything, wasn't paying attention during the session zero. And in that case, yeah, you should probably move on with the player, and or at least talk to them and be like, hey, what's going on? Do you actually want to be here? Because you're not putting in the effort like the rest of us are. So that can be an issue if they're refusing to engage with it in that way, if that's what you mean by story, right? If by story you mean setting, set dressing, world building, that sort of stuff, okay, I can see that being an issue. If by story, this word, I hate this word in tabletop RPGs. It's such an awful word because, again, I don't know exactly what you mean, but it is sort of, it's throwing red flags. If you mean, I have my big bad evil guy and he's got this plot to go kill so and so, and the character that your player has made goes, actually, I don't really care about so and so. He can go kill so and so. I'm gonna go. My character's personal goal is not tied into this big bad at all. That's on you, right? And that's why I think Mr. Max is so against the higher prep stuff, and I understand that component of it definitely, is when you write those characters with these plots, the plot should not be something that is fixed and going to happen. Characters in the world should plot. That's that's the only plotting I want to hear about before you've completed it, right? After you've completed your game, be it a session or the campaign, now you have a story, now you have a plot. But if you're writing a story and just little things can change here and there about it, right? Oh, this character that's not that important might die. This fight might be a little easier or a little harder. You're not really role playing. I mean, it's possible, I suppose, to role play in that, but when your players have no true agency because you need them to follow, oh man, I did all this work, and this player's just going off the rails trying to do all this stuff. Well, why'd you put the rails down in the first place? Right? When you have the issue of the murder hobo, that can typically be a sign that either A, and I think this is a little reductive, what you've written just isn't that interesting, or B, it's that you've written at all, right? Even if you've written something, masterful, you've written the next great American novel, as Shauner would say. I hope he's doing all right, by the way. Please send your prayers if you're a praying individual to him and his family. That's just not what a lot of people have sat down to do. They've sat down to play Dungeons & Dragons or a tabletop RPG. They haven't sat down to listen to your novelization. So understand that sort of the more you do try to corral things into a nice, neat, storyline package, the more a lot of people will try to push the boundaries. This is something we actually can take from video game design. The more restrictive you make a video game, the more people, a lot of players, will try to push the boundaries and see how they can break it, right? If I see that there are invisible walls that prevent me from going to certain areas just by fiat, just because the game doesn't want me to go over there, I'm going to try yet harder to get to that area. Whereas if I really can just walk in any direction, if I just walking for, 5, 10 minutes in a direction and it's kind of clear that there's nothing much interesting over there, I'm going to naturally go towards the more interesting stuff. That's why I'm a much bigger proponent of don't have a story, just have people and things in the world that are doing stuff. That's all. And if the players interact with it, if the characters interact with it, great. If they don't engage with it, that's fine. Give them consequences for that. Let's say the town guard has, you've started your prep work. Here's all my prep work for something. I've got a town. Maybe the town has a name. Maybe it's got major exports, this, that, and the other. Maybe I make it up offhand. Doesn't really matter. They've got murders going around. I don't even know what the cause of these murders are. We'll figure that out as we play. But the town guard, he's understaffed. He doesn't have the people. He doesn't have any detectives. He's just got, guys who deal with crimes as they see them. Well, they're not seeing these murders happen. So he needs to task some people to do it. The player characters are presumably competent people, and he's in a rough spot. Whatever. He'll pay him wood. Well, let's say that just doesn't interest these player characters, right? You misread either the player's interest or the player character's goals. They don't actually align here after all, and the player characters decide to go out of town. Well, that's not a problem, right? How do you handle a player that does this, that refuses to engage with this NPC, engage with the story as they say, but I will say engage with this NPC and his dilemma? Well, that's fine. Later on, maybe the party ends up in or even just one of the characters, they're not together at the hip, ends up in a sticky situation, gets thrown in jail. Well, if they had helped that town guard, they could have put in a good name, and now it's going to be a lot trickier. Now maybe they're being investigated for the murder now. Hey, how come you didn't want to help earlier? Oh, now you've been caught stealing. What else have you been doing? That sort of thing. Just have the world react naturally to the player characters. And now you've got something that's happening totally differently, right? And this is just one example. I could just keep riffing off of this for ages with possibilities and yeah buts, but that's not really the point. The point is, let things flow organically and let things flow naturally. If you've got a roguish, thievish character, let them be a rogue or a thief. Right? It's so stupid that, especially in Dungeons and Dragons, they've been boiled down to a combat stabby guy, right? Why are they not allowed to do what the title of their class used to be in, AD&D for that matter? But, why aren't they allowed to do whatever they want to do, right? That's what Dungeons and Dragons advertises itself as. So if you as a DM, GM, game referee, whatever your game or system calls it, are being frustrated that the players are doing what the box and the game manual tells them they can do, limited only by your imagination, well, really what you're telling them is, you're only limited by my imagination. That's not exactly interesting, right? And like I've said earlier, you poison the well when you do stuff like this. You introduce this concept that it's, oh, I guess that's what Dungeons and Dragons is. I just sort of get to be a human die roller, and you'll hear me use these lexical terms that other people use because they're good ones. And hopefully on the RPG Crusade website we can have an Enchiridion, if you will. But it's just, yeah, it's frustrating. And I haven't even scrolled down here, so I'll get to that. I'll stop rambling here. Dungeon Craft, man, he's got some cool wargaming concepts, and he actually has a cool, really light battle map concept that I do like, but man, on his stuff on roleplay, it's antithetical to the way we in the 3D40 hobby want to roleplay. I think I can speak for most of us with that, at least. I say, Phil, we appreciate your work, but things aren't working out. We've decided to move in another direction. Best of luck. Then I replaced them with a more cooperative player. And that's, Man, there's a whole can of worms here with the domestication of man and oh, uh, yeah, there's a lot to be said here. And you know, the Ed 209 here is a meme, but hell, it's not. It's not that far fetched from here, honestly. I mean, you've got the super corporate speak here, right? You don't have to always be playing tabletop RPGs with friends or people you personally know, but hopefully they become your friends, right? Plenty of people I've never met, you know, Crispy, Shauner, Rick, Max, Nick, Zonar, etc. I consider you guys friends, you know, not like to the same extent that someone I've physically met and gone through any, you know, real amount of hardship with, but still, it's uh, this is sort of a hint that what Dungeon Craft here is looking for is for you to shut up, sit down, and engage with what he has written. And maybe you can add your little snarky jokes and one liners here and there, but that's it. You're adding the set dressing. Don't fucking change my lines. I'm the director here. That's very much what this reads of. And here, apparently, Sasha is to find out why they're not engaged. Maybe they don't like the setting. Maybe they don't know how to engage. Yeah, that's a good answer if you're tackling this as is without all of the can of worms right here, right? Talk to your players. Yeah, maybe they don't like the setting. This can be a sign that you didn't do a session zero, right? It always comes back to the session zero. Dawn, try to make sure they get to use their character's cool stuff in the times they like to engage, likely combat. Uh, Again, if that's the case, you should probably be playing a war game and try to make sure they get to use their character's cool stuff. I want to have a follow up video on this. Tabletop RPGs are kind of like Legos. They give you a suggestion as to what you can do with the Legos. They don't tell you what you can't do with the Legos, right? If you want to take a friggin' soldering iron cutting tip and cut your Legos in half and build something totally different with them, that's your prerogative. Use your abilities in creative ways. This should more be a message to the GM to arbitrate that, you okay, the game doesn't say you can do that. Obviously, don't say this. This is just your thought process. But yeah, you can do that. Sure. Thing happens. The intended effect. Or the intended effect, however, with a catch, etc. Or it just doesn't work. Whatever. And then we have green text here. I won't read this. This is why experience point games are better than goalpost. Holy shit, whole can of worms there. We're not talking about that right now. Will anyone miss them if you boot them from the campaign? I mean, this is fine. You can remove players, but I mean, you're going to be creating an echo chamber where it's very likely that you won't improve. Then you lose another player. You don't have enough players to do whatever it is you want to do. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes really difficult to recruit new players because it turns out you've spent years playing the exact same way because you just boot anyone that disagrees with you or, you know, has any sort of different idea of how to play. And now your game is just totally dead and, you know, you're making posts around, oh, it's so hard to find players. There aren't enough players out there. There's a player shortage. Well, you're creating the player shortage, right? By being a terrible GM. Like I was telling Shauner a couple months ago, we don't really have a GM shortage. We have a good GM shortage. Work with them to create a personal goal for their character. Again, session zero, yeah, personal goal. And then the second part, then work it into something that can be worked towards congruently with the story. No, you're storyboarding here. You're not role playing, right? Maybe that naturally happens, but you know how interesting it is when you have a character's personal goal that goes opposite or, you know, diagonally, if you will, to someone else's goals? That's where intrigue comes about. That's where, hey, you know, maybe we can finish your problem and then we can come to my problem. No, let's look at Vermintide. Vermintide 2. You have Baron, Oathseeker. Nobody really knows why he's there. Or Barden, sorry. Baron is a different Warhammer character, if I remember correctly. Barden Oathseeker. He's looking for a lost keep, a lost hold, Carrick Zorn. That has really nothing to do with any of the other Vermintide characters. And it's interesting that they're all strung together like that. That's interesting dialogue. That generates interesting drama if you do want to take from pre-written stuff. So, this idea that everyone has to be tied together at the hip and driving towards the same goal with no catch is. No. This is the correct answer. So, again, it's kind of disingenuous, right? Don't be disingenuous, but, story in D&D should be more of a scenario that players either stumble into or don't. I think this is getting close to the concept, right? And they use story in quotes. I like that. I like that they're kind of acknowledging that, yeah, this is a terrible word. I will give them the benefit of the doubt and say that this is getting close, right? Oh yeah, if it's blatant, I ask them if they just want to hang out. Yeah, exactly. If you don't like my story, why don't you DM? I mean, I suppose that's a solid answer. It's kind of reductive, like I said, but yeah. Yeah. Found they tend to get engaged or quit after 2-3 characters died. That's an interesting concept, right? Yeah, soap operas, pro wrestling. Hey, I wonder if they listen to Black Lodge. Pro wrestling and comic books know how to pretty quickly get the exact same character with an eye patch and goatee back in the action. Yeah, and they mention it, this Scooby Dooing because of how dumb yeah, and it can be dumb, right? This is kind of a separate issue, character deaths and recurring characters, right? Yeah. Yeah. And and yep, and we've got, of course, verified person who just says, spawn in an orc to make a Monty Python reference. It's all so tiresome. Make the story engage with him. Anime GIF or VTuber GIF, I'm not sure. This is actually a halfway solid answer if you read into it. Make the story engage. Like I said, murder doesn't get solved because the characters aren't that interested in it. Maybe someone they do know eventually gets murdered, or maybe they come back to this town to sell stuff and everyone's dead there because it's not just your regular old serial killer. It's some eldritch abomination that's slowly been killing the whole town. Whatever. There are so many good answers to this situation. And there are so many questions as to why this is the situation in the first place. I really wanted to make this video to, if you take nothing else, illustrate why we have to have the 3D, 4D, etc. Because off of a single sentence, it is so difficult to even engage with what this person means. Is what this person trying to do the same as what we're trying to do? I don't even think it is. I'm going to scroll up because this is freaking me out. I'd rather look at Hank Hill. I have no idea how to even communicate this in a form factor that isn't 18 eons long, right? We need to be on the same page as far as the language goes to start discussing why the hell are you even having a story before the game's been played? Let me know your guys' thoughts. I have more I could say here, but I'm going to cut it off here and engage in the comments. And maybe we should stream about this. We should figure out... I want to do more streams, of course. More HEMA stuff on the way, always. Let me know other stuff you'd like to hear about. I've had a lot of time to sit and think and ponder. I haven't played a tabletop in a little bit because my schedules have been all over the place, so I have just been sitting and thinking. All right. Thank you guys. See ya.